I would like to welcome my panelists. So we have Larron, the founder of Dopamine Finance. We have Nader from Eigen Labs. We have Daniel from HLV and Matty from Legion. So welcome, gentlemen. Today we're going to spend the next 30 minutes to talk basically on how tokenomics looks like in a multi-chain world. And we will be focusing on restaking and looking at basically what restaking and how chain fusion can enhance the restaking environment. So before we start, who here knows what restaking is? By a show of hands. Okay, that's fair enough. Who here knows what liquid staking is? Okay, so that's very good. We don't need to make any additional introductions. So without further ado, I'll let my panelists introduce themselves and tell you more about what they do and what they're working on. Then we can take it off from there.
Cool, I'll start. I'm Larron. I'm working on a project on the ICP called Dopamine. It's an integrated staking and universal security protocol, very open, and would be glad to chat with anybody after this in more detail.
Hey guys, my name is Daniel. I work at HLV. It's a token design firm. We help projects design and launch their tokens and work with a number of games, protocols, AI projects.
I'm Nader. I'm the Director of Developer Relations at Eigen Labs, and focused on everything from teams building AVSs, which are essentially different services on Eigen layer, as well as teams building on EigenDA, which is our data availability layer. Happy to be here.
Hi, and I'm Matty, former tokenomics designer for Status, one of the earliest ICOs in Ethereum, former tokenomics researcher for Stacks, top 50 project by market cap, author of an open source guide on tokenomics called Tokenomics for Builders that's been positively reviewed by Placeholder, Monad, Tensor, and then also a founder of a platform bringing public token sales that are regulatory compliant back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, gentlemen. So I think we can start by just talking a bit about how restaking kind of changed a bit the environment and how we're looking at securing ecosystems right now purely from a tokenomic perspective. Because I think that was one of the main innovations that was brought by restaking, having this economic security. And maybe we can start from the other side, from Matty. Like, how do you see basically innovation coming from the tokenomic side to the network side, and what do you see as the most important aspect of restaking? And
Yeah, I think there's some unique challenges with restaking because you're essentially reusing, you're leveraging an existing asset for security or some other use case. Eigenlayer being the classic example people think of with Ethereum. And then the question becomes then projects that are launching on that are using that. How does their own native token fit in, right? And so these models of like dual staking or other approaches, it's tricky to navigate the kind of additional frictions you're putting on users versus the benefits to your own ecosystem and token. So it does require some careful threading the needle, and I don't think as an industry we have the clear, one right answer yet, or that necessarily even exists.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of abstraction that's built on top of all this that just makes it a lot simpler for the average person to understand how to interact and not have to think about all of the underlying pieces that are working, because you have all of these different teams that are building all these different pieces of software that are going to be essentially, hopefully, yielding rewards for the people that are staking into them. But the average person that is maybe used to trading stock, or they're used to maybe investing in an ETF or some type of other more traditional type of product, I think just being able to abstract away all of this will make it just that much more desirable for the average person to participate. And I think that we're already seeing a lot of those things. So people are building products on top of products on top of products, abstractions on top of abstractions, and really the UX needs to be polished a lot more to kind of abstract that away even more. So,
yeah, I think shared security is like one iteration of the use case of restaking, but it's quite a big, broad design space. So I'm quite excited to see what we are going to create kind of by nesting tokens in derivatives of some kind, and yeah, what's going to happen to those assets. In general, I'm excited about restaking and shared security as a means of creating a sandbox for experimenting with new decentralized systems. I think that's very exciting, but there's a lot left to explore there.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I'd say one of the most important things in my mind is adaptability. You're going to be able to hedge, for example, a new network, new infrastructure, supplemental infrastructure against assets like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana or even ICP at that. And so I think it's very interesting when you think about how you can kind of architect these different systems and kind of connect the dots between them. But I think protocols need to be designed for complete flexibility, right? So people should be able to pretty much bond, unbond, move their assets around, and the protocol should adapt to that rather quickly. So I think it's going to be a very careful design. Definitely agree with all those points. But shared security, I think, is really, really amazing and going to be very interesting for the innovation that can occur from it.
And yeah, I guess it's really interesting to have like products on top of products and so on. But how much is too much in restaking? And like what's the point where basically the risks outweigh the benefits of having such a complex system where you have yield on top of yield and you're securing networks and then you're restaking various derivatives and so on. So kind of how do you see maybe the risk spectrum on this, and where are we actually as an industry? Just to give everyone a bit of background, so restaking started in Ethereum, but it's going, and I think Larron will discuss a bit more on how it's going into other networks. But how's the risk spectrum on restaking in general?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's the big question people ask, and people like criticize, restaking as rehypothecation, like the fiat banking system. I think a key point though is that if the risk is compensated equivalently, equal or greater to the base layer, staking rewards, what you've got is an additional yield coming in. And so if market participants are on average rational and they're pricing in a given yield for an asset that's used for restaking, increasing the numerator of what's coming in means that the fair market value of the asset increases. And so as long as the risk is being commensurately or proportionately rewarded, I don't think it increases necessarily systemic risk in the way that people often mention or exaggerate. Not that there are no risks, of course, though.
But just sorry, before other panelists share their thoughts, what is the systemic risk, in your opinion?
Well, the systemic risk is essentially, economic security risk, that you're securing so much TVL through all of these different layers, right? That if I can just attack the restaked asset, and if it's a 2/3 assumption, right, or a 1/3 for liveness, I can then cause liveness failures or even security failures, and I'm economically incentivized to do so if I can grab all this TVL by only investing a certain amount of money in the restaked asset.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you kind of think about the participants of a protocol like this relative to what they might be doing elsewhere, so you already had a lot of people that were staking ETH ever since it started, ever since it came into existence, and they were only, often generating like a 3% or 4% yield. And relative to kind of like the old way of building new services, a developer might say, okay, I'm going to build a new Oracle and I'm going to launch a token, and I want you to kind of take your assets from elsewhere and I want you to start participating in my new network. There's a lot of risk there because that's a new product, a new token, a lot of volatility. So therefore the developer and the team had to actually give that person a lot of rewards for running the operators and for participating in that new network. So therefore, the opportunity cost was them maybe selling ETH and then now buying this new token and all the volatility that comes along with that. But in this case, you're essentially able to not do that. You still have your rewards coming in from your staking on the platform of choice for however you're participating with ETH. And you're also then being able to say, okay, I like this product, I trust this team, I'm gonna go ahead and like opt in here, I'm gonna opt in there, and based on your risk tolerance, you can kind of choose one ABS, you can choose 1,000 ABSs, it's kind of up to you, and it actually provides a lot more flexibility, and you can still have like relatively low risk, in my opinion. So.
Is there a concentration risk regarding ABSs, meaning that if certain ABSs get too much influence, like is there a risk associated with that?
When you say too much influence, in what fashion?
Basically too much power over the networks and over the operators.
I can't
like
really.
A centralization point, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you had an ABS and they were kind of like the only one that everyone was maybe opting into or something like that, it would be the case. But we're not seeing that at all at the moment. But I guess it's something that we can kind of like watch out for and just see what happens.
Well, also, I think it would depend on like the slashing conditions of that ABS, right? Because you can customize those. So potentially, if there could be centralized risk, I think, but not definitive, like not deterministically.
Yeah, it comes back down to careful design of the protocol, making sure that you're decentralized enough and you've got enough, I guess enough different hedging, right? So like one of the things I've been looking at, I think is really interesting, is even like combining Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and then your native token. Like how can you actually create like almost like an index, right? To kind of hedge against all the different possibilities.
I think the risks are very multifaceted. The economic risks of having like some asset compromised and how that affects others in the daisy chain is really only like one element. I think there's a bunch of coordination risks involved here. I think that let's say an Eigen layer, people will be able to potentially use their token to then be restaked as shared security in other protocols. And what happens when those projects fail and that token goes down? What happens to the other people in the daisy chain? There's a lot left to kind of still be discovered here.
That's also why I think it's really, really important to be a highly adaptable protocol. And that's kind of my thing with flexibility. The more flexible that you can make your protocol, and the quicker that people can, bond and unbond, then I think the safer the protocols will be over the long haul.
I think those were all some interesting points. So now maybe switching gears a bit, like this whole restaking is kind of popular in the Ethereum world, and we have two experts in the Ethereum world and two experts in Bitcoin. How do you see restaking kind of going beyond Ethereum? Is there potential to securing other types of networks? I'm thinking Bitcoin L2s here, and how would that look like in this multi-chain scenario where when you're securing Ethereum L2s, Bitcoin L2s? How will that interact? And will this added complexity be even an added risk, or how? Like, what are your thoughts on this? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there's multiple different kinds of risks. So I think having diversified collateral, for example, like a basket of index assets, would decrease some types of risk, but arguably increase other types of codependency risks. So, but the short answer kind of is, will this go beyond Ethereum? Absolutely, that's already happening, right? You see Bitcoin solutions that are staking Bitcoin, or restaking Bitcoin for security, staking Bitcoin and staking the protocol's native token, in pairs and dual form to provide security to the chain. So yes, it's here to stay, whether you like it or not. And I mean, everything in this space is a permissionless system, and so people are going to experiment with designs. Unfortunately, even when they're not necessarily the most sound designs, and we just have to be mindful of that and continue to stress test these ideas and talk about them and make sure that we are at least calling out things publicly, so we don't end up with another Terra or that type of situation.
I think if you look at it as not like the thing that didn't interest me was the whole financial part of this. I've been a developer for like 13 years, and it didn't really interest me until I actually understood the means to the end. And if you kind of look at it more as like a developer platform, it makes a lot more sense, because like if you have an analogy of something like the App Store came into existence. It provided a platform and it provided distribution, provided guardrails for developers to deploy applications and have people use them and monetize them in a way that wasn't possible before. This is essentially like a new developer platform for this, really proof-of-stake networks or decentralized networks that didn't exist before. So now you have all these people, and I resonated with what Daniel said about experimentation, being able to kind of try out new ideas without as much risk. As a developer, you don't have to kind of worry about doing a lot of the things you did before. So every ecosystem recognizes that. Berachain, Monad, all these teams are actually already building out these products for their networks. So I do think every single network in existence from now on is going to have this, because it just opens the door for everything outside of their execution environment. If you launch Berachain today, in the past you were limited to the EVM or whatever VM they were using. Now they're like able to build anything, like literally any verifiable network. So that's the way I look at it.
One of the big risks that I haven't really seen discussed is the risk of misunderstanding the purpose of this. I've worked with clients where they're like, yeah, why don't we just bring on a bunch of restaked assets? And when we kind of go through their token design and look at what is needed, what is not, you see that actually, if they were to bring on this security, it would be competing with their token utility. And is this something that they really want to do? So I think that there are nuances where this is really relevant to a project, but we're kind of taking it on as being like, oh yeah, let's just acquire more stake security, not realizing that you have to pay for it, that it can compete with your own utility, that it may not be the best thing in your interest. And I think ultimately we'll kind of have a come to Jesus moment where we'll see that, yes, this will increase our yield, but this isn't like, oh, I'm going to add another 20% yield, blah, blah, blah. From talking with AVSs, the AVS that had the best designed token design that I heard of was looking like, yeah, we'll provide an extra 50 bips, right? That's 0.5% additional yield. And when they do their modeling with their incoming revenue and how they're paying for security, they're like, yeah, that's sustainable for us. But I think the expectations in the market are going to lead to some confusion and disappointment.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. It's something that's been like, I've been banging my head on the wall for a while, actually. And I think that, everyone likes to, wave the big TVO on and say, we have this huge pile of cash, right? And it's really not needed necessarily, depending on what you're doing. But also, I think this opens up more interesting concepts as to, the importance of the details you might need in that protocol. So just like a completely different example would be like a reputation score, right? Like, who do you want to allow to actually stake in your network? Do you want A16Z to just dump $1 billion on the network and like earn all the yield, right? Or do you want your users actually to earn that different pieces of yield? So those are the additional, I guess, careful designs and craftsmanship that you need to be thinking about.
Yeah, so I like a lot that we're getting into the kind of like token design aspect. So maybe now we can talk about Ponzinomics in restaking. How does that look like?
I guess the main fear that most critics have is that restaking itself is a form of Ponzinomics, right? Is that it's just rehypothecation of the base asset, and you can infinitely leverage this again and again and again. You can do this multiple times over and be securing so many assets with this only fractional reserve, if you will, of the reserve base asset. So I think that's the primary concern. I don't know. We have. I'm sure we'll see lots of new fancy, Ponzinomic experiments. Unfortunately, I mean, as Daniel was referencing, one of the big challenges is designing a actually useful token to pair when you're doing, restaking. And so I'm sure there'll be lots of AVSs that even unintentionally set up Ponzinomic models where their token is basically just vaporware. So it's going to be a fun ride, as it always is, but there'll be, most projects will fail, and there'll be some important learnings from it.
I think it's safe though. It's probably just more of a waste of time, right? Because if you can secure multiple protocols at the same time, then it's just 20 of them fell, one of them succeeds, whatever,
I kind of think everything's a Ponzi. So let's say if I'm defining a Ponzi, like there's a closed system. So this is a sustainable system is the system can keep running based on all the resources within the system. Let's say a Ponzi system is like it needs continuous new input into it to sustain itself and keep growing. So let's say US Treasury bonds, right? It sustains itself because it has a strong network and people that are willing to trade in it. But if ever you start getting a large amount of countries saying, we'll no longer hold this on our balance sheet, its value proposition really comes under question. So I think the challenge here is for us to create strong network effects and utility for these things so that there is value that continuously drives and pushes these things forward so that it reaches some sort of critical mass, which is super fucking hard, takes time, and is not clear how to do.
Yeah, I will 100% agree with you with the Ponzinomics of even like the US dollar. I've had this argument with people, but one of my buddies actually kind of touche'd me, and he's like, well, they have nukes. So that's
a big value proposition.
That was the big value add, I guess, to the USD.
Do you want to add?
No, I agree with everything that they've said. I mean, the base layer itself, the protocol enables staking. Everything that's built on top of a protocol is really permissionless. Anyone can do anything. I can build a Ponzi today on any network. I guess it's going to just play out like it always does. Things will happen, good and bad. It will take the good things and we'll leave the bad things.
Cool. So I think we're getting close to the end of our panel. So I want to give you the chance to kind of, because we have quite a lot of builders here in the room. Maybe you can share some final thoughts for somebody that is thinking of building a multi-chain system, a multi-chain, I don't know, maybe governance system. What would be some key aspects to look for in their tokenomics, just very briefly, like what would be something interesting so that they don't build a Ponzinomics restaking system?
Go ahead.
So Kraken releases a really good report called the State of Staking or something like that. And in it, you can see the protocols and the stake rates. That's the amount of tokens in circulating supply being staked. And it ranges from, let's say, 30 to 60% based on the protocol. What that tells you, though, is staking is a huge utility for tokens, right? And they're staking to secure the protocol. So I know that EigenLayer has a dual staking model. You can use both stakings to reach quorum on things. But when you're really thinking about this, it's important to consider the utility of having your own token act as the means of security to stake on your network versus leveraging shared security. I really see leveraging shared security as an opportunity to test and find product market fit for a new decentralized system before, like, let's say, really committing in a certain direction. It's just, there's a lot to consider here, and token utility is one of those.
Yeah, I agree. You should have both, and I think that's what we're seeing. Teams launch an ABS, they launch their own token, and they might start off securing their network with ETH, but ultimately they'll be securing their network with their own token. And it typically starts off on the left-hand side and moves over to the right-hand side, the left side being ETH, the right-hand side being their own token. And it makes a lot of sense, and it's just an order of magnitude simpler to build that way also, and it's an order of magnitude cheaper to build that way. So what we have, if you're a builder, we have hundreds of people building ABSs. We're deploying a lot of them to mainnet every week. A few of them go to mainnet. I'll be happy to help talk to anyone to get them there if you're interested in building on EigenLayer.
That was a great point. So from talking to ABSs, what I realize is there's actually like a product development cycle here that we haven't quite figured out. To say you start with shared security, you eventually end up with your own token. What are all the steps in between? we're still kind of figuring out that blueprint, but there is some sort of development cycle here.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point compared to, like, that development cycle also exists today, but it looks more like you start with a private network, then you move to a federated model, and then you move to a distributed model, and it's largely like a giant question mark between each of those steps for most teams, right? And it's a messy, like, discrete jump instead of this continuous growth. And so I think that's one of the benefits of this sandbox, which is a great point, that restaking can provide, is it smooths that kind of growth curve and makes it ideally less painful and more continuous instead of these discrete trying to transitions. I mean, thinking through the token utility and the value capture mechanisms, value creation, value accrual is always key, but especially so when you have multiple tokens, because they're going to always be overlapping to some degree and competing to some degree. And so thinking through carefully how they interact is super vital. Yeah.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd mention is true utility, right? I mean, you want PMF at the end of the day. So, I mean, I played with, you could just, I guess kind of going against, your ideology, which I agree, not disagreeing fully, but you could play with the idea of having a network completely reliant on Bitcoin security or Eigen, ABS, and it's such a great utility that the token is still valuable and the token is still usable within that network. And you don't even need to rely on that at all for POS. So I think that opens up for a very interesting, even potential, category of maybe some new forms of SaaS or something that develop from this.
Well, yeah, there's definitely like consumer apps and use cases that don't need security per se, right? Like anything that just settles to Ethereum L1, right? Like a consumer application can just use that as the security, and their token has other utility and value. For sure, there are those cases. I think builders just need to be intentional about recognizing which category are they, and too often builders are not, self-aware, I guess, of where they fit in.
Yep.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it was very useful. And I'll hand it over back to Emma. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.